Hey, everybody, I'm Mark. I'm an alcoholic. Great to be on this meeting. It's great to be texting with my wife, who is making me laugh, which is awesome. Um, I love being able to laugh in Alcoholics Anonymous. I did not laugh as much as I wanted to before I got here. Stephen, thank you so much for asking me to come on here and speak. It's an honor. I'd be lying if I wasn't thinking about it all day. And and that's because it matters to me. And that's it. This matters to me. The Alcoholics Anonymous has changed my life. It's given my kids a father, my wife a husband, my parents a son, and my friends a friend, my employees a boss. It's just, I was not able to accomplish anything I wanted to accomplish before I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's men like Stephen who I watch and respect greatly. And I mean, who looks better than him? He looks dapper again. Each day looks more and more like a gentleman. There's 3 greetings that I love people use on Alcoholics Anonymous. One is this guy in LA who was my first sponsor. His name's JW. And he said, I'm sober today by God's mercy, the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the practice of the principles of the 12 steps and 12 traditions in the big book. And he used to say that every day. And I'd say, you're at a meeting every day. And he said, honey, I don't know which one's keeping me sober. So that was my introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous. And then there's another guy who's on my men's meeting, who's on here tonight, who says, I'm an alcoholic and my name and my problem is Henry. And I relate to that one a lot because Mark is definitely the problem. And then there's Stephen Todd. And I won't do an impression of him, although I do nail it pretty good, but without the suspenders and bow tie, it's going to fail. But he says, great to be sober here, great to be sober anywhere. And then he says, nothing bad in my life, a drink won't make worse. Conversely, nothing good in my life, a drink won't totally destroy. And I remember hearing that on my men's meeting in the morning for me, which is noon in Florida, every day from this guy. And, anyone who's a lawyer and a deadhead is a friend of mine. So I'm a big fan of Stephen Todd. And, I look on here and aside from my wife who showed up here, there's probably 20 guys on here that I know and see every day who are dialed in and to hear me talk about my experience and my strength and hope. And, that's really cool because I got on this men's meeting called Men Overtime. It was a Men on Track meeting that some of these guys started 30 years ago or whatever. And during the pandemic, it's been Men Overtime. And I think it was a Monday meeting at the train station in Florida, Delray or Boca or somewhere. And when the pandemic hit, it changed to every day on Zoom. And I was in Los Angeles and where I lived for 27 years. And my wife and I and 4 kids were moving to Boise. And I decided after 8.5 or so years of sobriety to relapse. And so at that point, before we were getting out of our house and moving to Idaho with 4 kids, and we'd never been to Idaho, we'd lived on the coast. We didn't know there was much in the middle. I thought Idaho was near Michigan, but we were going. And so I had, I think at that point, a couple of weeks. And I got to Boise and actually I got on some Zooms from LA to some meetings in Idaho because I wanted to connect. And at that point it was all Zoom. So when I got to Idaho, which is where I am now, I knew a lot of people and a couple really good buddies. And one of them, their sponsor went to this meeting in Florida. And I said, well, I'll check it out, and it was 10 o'clock every morning for me. And I got on there and something changed drastically in me where I saw men being the kind of man that I wanted to be. And can't cry this early in an hour share. So it's also hot as hell in this man. So I saw these guys and they were doing things that I always wanted to do, but couldn't execute. And they were handling situations that I feared, the biggest life-changing things that could happen. And they were handling them with grace and dignity. And they were handling them sober, but they weren't just like white knuckling it. And I've known people who are 20, 30, 40 years sober who are miserable and white knuckle it and don't practice spiritual principles, and they don't drink. And I can't do that. I can do that for weeks or months, but like the big book says, usually I'm drunk within a few weeks. I'm that guy. And that doesn't matter if I have 8 or 9 years or 5.5 years or 50 years. For me, if I stop doing what I need to do to be connected to God and therefore you people, I'm going to drink because I'm not an uncomfortable. I don't like discomfort. I don't want it. So I'm going to plug into something. It's either going to be drugs and alcohol or it's going to be God. And that's what I've noticed. Just that's not a guess. That's my experience. That's my life. And so I got on and I watched these men handle these things, and they weren't just handling them, but they were, there was a guy on our meeting, Unk, and maybe some of you know him, but like this guy was in the hospital and he was in there with years of sobriety in a hospital gown, barely able to breathe, on the meeting every day. And would the last meeting we heard him share, he talked about, he prayed to God for someone to show up that he could help. And the next day Unk died. And it's like, that is it. Like, that is a man who I think has accomplished everything I ever want to have. Like, forget any kind of material crap or even family, right? Because my family is amazing, but like, if I can't help somebody else that I'm uniquely qualified to help, like I can raise kids, but anyone can raise kids. If you just put your shit together and stay focused, you could probably, guess at how to raise a kid if you love them and try to guide them. But with an alcoholic, it's like, yep, I've been where you are. Yep, I did what you did. Yep, I feel what you feel. Yep, I've been through that. And here's what I did, which is what millions of other people did. You don't have to do it any different, and you're going to feel good like I do. And, and I'm sitting in a van outside a baseball field where my 16-year-old has a baseball game at 7:00, and it's a little after 6 here. I don't want to be late for the game. You know what I mean? So like, I'm doing this so I can walk out of the car and go be dad. It's just such an incredible gift. And, these men on this meeting, and I can't stress it enough. And I'm looking at all their faces, like they have pulled me through some massive stuff. And like, I never learned in Alcoholics Anonymous what I'm learning now, which is, you can be happy despite your circumstances. You can be useful and valuable despite your circumstances. I can be useful, valuable, and happy despite my circumstances. If things aren't going my way, I can still have a perspective that I'm in control of, which is I can either choose to see the good in things, and I can choose to say, this is going to have a benefit that I'll be able to share with someone else later. This gives me an opportunity to look inward and grow. And these aren't things that I know how to say. I grew up in New Jersey. We didn't talk about our feelings. We certainly didn't say like, well, if that experience is bad, that's going to be very helpful for another person, son. Like we didn't do that. It was like, just shut up, go play ball and shut up. And, I'm in awe of what I've seen. And by the way, these guys aren't, I have 3 years of sobriety right now. These guys have 20, 30, 40, 50. Like Steve C., this guy's on there with 51 years, like, I've had a seat at the banquet table a long time. And he just starts going on about what he does. And it's like, it hasn't changed to like connect with God. Steve's driving to gas stations to pick up guys to do the steps with. Like, and he has all these medical, anyway, it's what I want to be. It's who I want to be. And that's different for me because that's not who I wanted to be before I got here. It's not, it wasn't on the agenda. I wanted to, make a bunch of money, be validated by whatever means possible. And I wanted to feel good all of the time, not most of the time. And although I cared about you because I'm a good-hearted dude, I was unable to execute. And, that's just fascinating to me because it's not about putting down the drink. Like, sure, I put down the drink, but that's actually when my problems started. Like I'm not crazy when I drink and use. I mean, I am, but most people are. It's like you're inhibited by drugs and alcohol. I'm crazy before, I'm because I'm so uncomfortable without alcohol that I don't know what to do. I'm restless, I'm irritable, I'm discontent, I'm unable to connect with you. I don't want to think about you. And I'm selfish and self-centered, and I'll do whatever I can to feel better. And I grew up that way. Like I grew up in South Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia. I had 3 older brothers. So I was on a naval base out in California called Skaggs Island and Mare Island. My dad was in the Navy, and so until I was about 7, we were there. And then my dad retired and got a job in New Jersey, and so we moved. And I have a brother who is a year and a half older than me, and then two other brothers, one 6 years older than me, one 8 years older than me. And the two older ones, they were tight and they ran around and, created hell. And this was like the 70s. So like to think about what they were doing in that house compared to like what my kids are allowed to do in our house, it was Animal House. And then, and then my brother closest to me, we were best friends and super tight. So we did everything together. And the four of us would run around, but I was the youngest of four boys. And so for me, I remember being 8 years old and needing a ride. My dad was an NSA communications guy. So you never knew what he did. There was no bring your kid to work day. There was no talk about work. He would come home, he would sit in the chair, you'd get him a beer, or a glass of wine. He'd watch the ball game. He'd fall asleep. My mom, had a job during the day and then was in charge of like cooking, cleaning, and being bitter and resentful that she didn't have a better life and running around the house and doing the best she could. Right. She gave us a lot of love, which was cool. And they both did the best that they could, but neither one of them were really around to raise me and my other brother closest to me. We were raised by my older brothers who were kind of like wolves. So, when I was 8 years old, I needed a ride to a birthday party, and they said to me, yeah, we'll give you a ride, but you need to do this bong hit. And so I was like, well, what's a bong? I'm 8 years old. And there was this 4.5 foot purple bong. Now it's kind of funny thinking about it. It's called the Tower Inferno. And so I had to stand up on a chair and take a hit out of the Towering Inferno. And I remember coughing like crazy, and nothing happened. I didn't feel anything other than kind of disgusted by the smoke. But this was something I saw my brothers do all the time. But I do remember this. They thought I was cool. And I do remember they were like, that a boy, Marky, right? Like I felt like, okay, I'm part of the club. Like I want to be like my brothers. And this is what they do. And, they want me to do this. And I also want to ride to the party because my buddies are there. And so there you go. And that's a pattern that went on for a while. When I was 12 years old, my oldest brother decided to deal a lot of drugs. So I participated in that in junior high school. And like the thought right now of my 13-year-old doing what I was doing, or my 10-year-old, we have 10-year-old twins, a boy and a girl. And then I have a 16-year-old boy and a 14-year-old boy. And I can't imagine it, right? I mean, I just can't imagine them going through that. And, and a lot of things happen in my house that I don't think should happen to a kid. And so I held on to that. And I went out into the world and kind of lived in a way which was like, I'm not being taken care of the way that I think I should be taken care of. God, who I grew up with, going to church, and there was this God, and I was not agnostic. I was agnostic in the sense, I wasn't an atheist. I was agnostic in the sense that I believed there was a God. I believe that God was for you. I believe that God wanted nothing to do with me, clearly, because I had been taking some punishment and some things were going on that I was like, really? Like, now I'm supposed to be like, oh, thank you, God, for this wonderful evening. Like, I just didn't see it that way. I just didn't see it that way. And I remember my parents saying, like, if you would just think more about other people, if you would just think more about God. And I wanted to say to them, if you would just understand what's happening when you're not around, if you would just pay attention to what's going on in this house, then, maybe we wouldn't even need to talk about God. Maybe you guys could just do what you need to do, because that was my mindset. And my introduction to God was that, like we would go to church and have fun and stuff, but I just didn't get too deep into, I was like, not a religious guy, and I just didn't really want anything to do with it. And but I do remember in those days, like my brother Greg, who was closest to me, like we did everything together. We would go down to the shore at Ocean City, and my parents were great. We had a trailer and a campground down the shore, and like we would be at the beach all day long. We would just be in the ocean. I mean, I remember being in the ocean and a riptide hit really bad, and my brother Greg had to come out and save my life. And I just remember thinking, like, thank God I have Greg, right? Like, I remember that so vividly, like here was a dude who was just like, I got to go take care of my brother. And I felt taken care of in that moment, and Greg and I did everything together. We ran around like crazy. He and then at the end of the day at the beach, we would walk up to the walking streets in Ocean City, and the garages would all be open. So we would just tell my mom, like, hey, we'll be right back. We're just going to walk around. And we'd go up there and we'd open some refrigerators and grab a few beers, and we would drink them and then go back. And we're teenagers, and we'd go back to the beach. And, this was all summer, which was awesome. It was the most fun I had. Like, I felt no concern. I felt taken care of. I felt a part of, and I wasn't drinking 20 beers. Like, it was working. I felt like the world was this huge cornfield when I was a kid, and I was standing in the middle of it, and I didn't know where to go. And I felt like once I started drinking alcohol, it was like whipping this massive blade out in front of me at full speed that just cleared everything and allowed me to see. And like, what a tremendous event for me to be able to feel like I could participate in life. I was better. I played sports. I played music. I would break dance in Sea Wing with those nerds. I was smart, so I could get away with some of the other dudes. I was very good at saying, like, I'm this guy, I'm that guy, I'm this guy, and I'm that guy, because I don't want you to know who this guy is, and I could fit in, and everybody had a piece of me, and that was my life. Like, you got this piece, and because I'll be whoever you want me to be, right? Is that alcoholism? I don't know. It's discomfort, right? I'm a people pleaser. I'm insecure. I want to be liked. I think that's human. And so I would do whatever. And, it would make me do all of those things better. And I felt like the corn down. And at some point, like the book talks about, this invisible line, that blade that I threw out there was like a boomerang. And Bill talked about it a lot, where it's just like it would go out there and level the playing field, but at some point where I couldn't see, it would spin around in midair and start to come back. And so everyone in front of me started getting cut down by it, and then it cut through me, and it's like I couldn't stop. I mean, I think that's the fascinating thing to me about alcoholism. Like, I know how to stop drinking. I've done it many times, day, a week, a month, usually not more than a month. But I could stop, but I do not know how to stay stopped. And that's why, when people would say to me, don't drink no matter what, and I say, I get it. I understand. What that really means is that if you want to drink, call someone, go to a meeting, do all of these other things. It's not just don't sit there and don't drink. I can't do that on my own without God's help. I can't. So they would tell me, don't drink no matter what. And I say, but all I do is drink no matter what. I drink no matter good, no matter bad, no matter what, Marky, drink. Like, that is what I do. So tell me how to do that, right? And again, that's what these men have taught me to do. It's like, well, you get on your knees and you beg God to not. And you do these other things, right? And I think that's what it is when it's don't drink no matter what. It's like, reach for the other tools no matter what. It's like, don't go for a drink right away, because if you do these other things, you probably won't go for that. And that's been my experience. I moved out of my house and I went to my brother opened a landscaping company. So right after high school, I got into these colleges, but my parents, I couldn't afford to go. I got into Georgetown. I got into these places that I really wanted to go. I've told people for years that I went to Georgetown, but I never went. So if I told you that, I'm sorry, I never went. But like, people were like, what classes? I was like, yeah, whatever, dude. So I got into these schools, but I couldn't afford to go. And so I went to DC, and I got into this school, George Mason, and I lived with my buddies, and I started bartending in DC to pay the bills. And that was fun for a while. Like, I lived in Georgetown in this community of people where we just took care of each other. And, I ran this bar, you ran that bar. I come into your bar, I get to eat and drink for free. You come into my bar, and I didn't have a car for 8 years, and it was glorious. And then I remember in that period, so this was, I was 22 at that point, but when I was 18, my parents were so concerned that they sent me to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And I forget this all the time, in New Jersey. And I remember going there and listening to these people. It was me and like 7 older people. And by older, I mean, they were like 40, which is hilarious to me now, because I'm like, God, really? I don't want to be 40. So I would sit there and they would talk about their problems, and I would leave there. And there was this dude who was like 45, and he was like, you want to go to Crest Bar and get a beer? And I was like, yeah, I do. And I remember thinking that later, like, normal people don't get sent to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and leave the meeting and go with some like weird dude. And he was a weird dude to this dive bar to drink before going back home to my parents' house. And I remember thinking at that point, like, I definitely have this thing, but there's no way that I'm done. And so I went to DC and I led this life, and I had a lot of fun. It worked for me. Again, it made me comfortable. I got to meet people. I was a great bartender. I made a lot of money. I go to bed at 5 or 6 in the morning, and I thought that was just the jam. You slept till 2, and then you got up for your shift, and that was kind of life. What I didn't do was go to classes. I did accumulate some serious student debt, because they charge you whether you go or not. It's up to you if you go, but you don't get refunds when you just don't show up to classes. And so I'd come back one summer, my brother and I, we went down the shore and we were doing our thing, and we were up all night. And I had this 71 Buick GS convertible, which was such an awesome car. And I had the top down, and we were driving home in the morning from the shore, and I'd slept maybe like an hour. And I said to him, I feel like I need to take a nap. And he was like, well, let's stop. So we stopped at Wawa. I took a little nap. I dropped my brother off like, I don't know, 5 miles later. And then I was a couple miles from my home, and I was driving down this road, Crescent Road. And it was a Sunday morning. I fell asleep. And instead of, when I woke up, I was on the right side of the road. Thank God I wasn't on the left side of the road. And I was doing about 50. And instead of hitting the brake, I hit the gas. And when you push the gas on that car, it jumps. And so I quickly jumped to about 70, and I hit a telephone pole straight on. And I had no seatbelt on, and I broke all my ribs, and my rib went through my lung, and I broke all the bones in my face and my hand, and it was a disaster. And incredible that I had a friend who had just fallen asleep drunk a week before and died. And so I thought for sure that that was going to happen to me, and I jumped out of the car and was in shock, and went to this person's house and knocked on their door. And I'll never forget the look on this woman's face when she saw me standing there at her door. It must not have looked great, but I was in shock. So I just said, can I please use your phone, ma'am? And she almost passed out. And I went to the hospital, and I was there. And when I got out, the very first thing I did when I got back to my parents' house was drink, because it had nothing to do with the alcohol. So I didn't sleep. And that's just how and thank God I had dropped my brother off, because my engine had come up into the passenger seat of the car, and it just, that would have killed him at that point. And that was my life, and I wouldn't pay bills. I didn't, I would get bills and I would put them in a drawer, and I would get bills and I put them in a drawer. And so I was going to George Mason at that time, and I went to the bookstore and I wrote a check for my books. And it was $250. I didn't have $250, but I needed the books. And, I got notices from the university bookstore saying, you need to settle up on your, and I just put them in a drawer. I didn't do anything with them. Well, they didn't take too kindly to that, because I was bartending in DC, and 8 people from the fugitive squad showed up in the bar and came and grabbed me in the middle of my brunch shift on a Sunday morning, and took me to jail in DC. And it was a Friday, or no, it was Sunday. So I had to spend the night there because no one was there till Monday. So I got paraded around in DC. They move you to all these different jails, and you're tied to other people in this like van that's made for 8 people that they put 72 in. And I was tied to this very big guy. And when I got out of the first van, I popped my knee and I tore my ACL. And so I had to spend the next 40 hours in this little DC jail system of moving around with this knee in excruciating pain, in my my gear from bartending at the bar. And it was just humiliating. And I got out of there, and people talked to me about, there was a guy named Scott in DC who was a sober bartender, and he said, you should probably go to AA. And I said, you should probably mind your own business. I just need to get out of this. And so I got a lawyer and blah, blah, blah. And, I didn't go to any AA meetings, and I showed up to court and with my parents, and I was dressed in my nice suit. And I'll never forget, because at that point in my life, it was like, as long as I could clean it up and show up, like back then, suit up and show up meant something different. but I would put a suit on and I'd show up and Your Honor, and I'm sorry. And this, I could get out of things, or my parents would help me get out of things. And when I went in there and he said, you're going to jail for a year for your $250 book check thing. And he said 9 months if it's suspended, and you're going to go for 3 months. And I remember just thinking to myself, well, I wonder when that's going to start. And somebody grabbed me and walked me out of the courtroom. And I looked at my parents who were crying, and I was crying. And I remember saying, but I wore my nice suit because I was such a little boy. And I was so immature and so incapable of dealing with consequences that were held to me. And this guy was giving me consequences. And I don't know why, but I did not like that man. And he was on my 4th step. And, thank God I can't find him because he's on my 9th step. But I'm telling you, I'm willing to make amends to him. And my amends to him is simply that I've hated him every single day. But what he did was give me some accountability. And that's why I didn't like him, because nobody gave me accountability. And I wasn't a guy, like, I'd never been to jail. I went into jail. I went into jail in Fairfax County, and I spent 45 days there, and luckily all 45 were good. So I got out of there in this half-time thing. But like, I was in there with people that, in my mind, I didn't belong in there with. But I'll tell you what, 90% of those people were in there from drugs and alcohol. 90% of those people were just like me. They just drank longer or different circumstances financially. And I did whatever I had to do to stay drunk. They did whatever they had to do. They were different things, but I can't say that those things wouldn't have become my things. So I remember getting out of there and thinking to myself, this is the best I've ever felt in my entire life. I hadn't had a drink in 45 days. I worked out every day. It was incredible at ping pong, and I hated the food. But to be honest with you, I connected with people in there. I talked to people. I was open and vulnerable. And I thought maybe there's something to this sobriety thing. And so I got out, and that night I was going to go to a meeting in Georgetown. And instead I went to Opiate de Cachan, this place, and I drank 2 bottles of wine and, and off and running. And so I got to LA and I did all of that there. And then I met this gal who was amazing. And, I had tried to get sober a couple of times before. And so we had this little company. And so I was in the conference room, this glass conference room, and I'd been lying about using and hiding it. And I was sitting in there with this potential client. And my girlfriend showed up with a bag of stuff that she had found. And she found it she was laying in the bathtub and got this vision to go look in my old cleats on the top shelf of the closet, that there was something in there. And when she went in there and found was a bunch of stuff that she knew I had, but had never been able to pin it down because I'm a deceptive, crazy making. I will make you crazy for thinking I'm doing something wrong while I'm doing something wrong, because I'm desperate to hide it because I don't want to be found out, because that means I have to change. And she held up this bag and there was no way out. I mean, it was literally, I was in a fishbowl. It was in a glass conference room. And I remember the look on her face. And I remember saying to this guy, I'll be right back. And I left that conference room, and anger ensued and disappointment and everything else. And I remember finding myself sitting on the curb outside, and my friend was picking me up and taking me to detox, and I was off to rehab. And I went, and after breaking this girl's heart, and I went, and I'm so good at breaking hearts, man. Like, it's so unintentional. I think that's the most frustrating thing in the world, is just how unintentional it is, how opposite of what I want it is. But then there it is. I'm like, man, I did it again. Like that look that I've seen on people's face 1,000, 2,000 times, and just going, and I know it's me. I know it's me. So I went and I got into the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got honest as I could at that time. And I got out and I stayed sober, and that girlfriend became my wife. And we had a couple little kiddos and this beautiful little life. And I was sponsoring, 16, 17 guys. And the reason I was doing that is so that I could say I'm sponsoring 16 or 17 guys, not because I wanted to help them. I mean, at the time I wouldn't have admitted that, but I do now. And I was speaking all over the place. And, I love that. Like I loved being the center of attention and, getting a name for myself in Alcoholics Anonymous. That was like, let's go. And and I forgot that I need to talk to God, and then I need to be honest, not just honest when about money and cash register honesty, but honest about my emotional life and how I'm feeling, and work through things, and how am I going to grow and actually change instead of being manipulative and passive aggressive, which I am so good at being. I forgot all that, and I leaned on the fact that I was just the man. Like, what are you talking about? Look at me. Like, are you kidding me? I'm in meetings all the time, and if I'm not speaking, I'm critiquing the speaker, and that guy should have said this, and wow, he's going over, and look at this guy, and all of that stuff, right? And like, just disconnect. And then I got hurt, and it was like, I ended up having pain medicine, and I thought, well, I'm connected again. And so I relapsed and broke this girl's heart again. And so I got it back together pretty quickly and dove in and took the hit and the consequences of my actions. And I got back into Alcoholics Anonymous and tried to dig a little bit deeper. The cool thing about Alcoholics Anonymous is that the first 164 pages haven't changed. So people say to me, like, what's different? I was like, I just need to do the work. If I do the work and I never stop doing the work, I'll never drink. If I do the work and I stop doing the work, I'll drink every time. If I never do the work, I'll always drink. It's that. The stories can change, this can change, but if I do the steps and I get honest and I rely on God and I open up and I help other people and I stop being such an insecure egomaniac, gonna be okay. 100%. My experience for years on end. So that's what I did. And I dove into that, and, but still still major insecurity, not worthy, super possessive, just not spiritually healthy. But again, I can play it pretty well. So I played it pretty well. But I had good years of sobriety, but then I got into like, okay, cool. I'm kind of settled in. My wife's settled in, like, she's not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. I'm complacent. Life's getting better. And yet again, at 9 years, or right around there, I don't even know because I was so dishonest about it. I relapsed. So 3 years ago, I begged this woman to stay with me. And more importantly, I started to dive into what was really, for me, the problem, which is not Henry. Henry is Henry's problem. Mark is Mark's problem. I wish Henry was my problem, because then I would just tell Henry to go do some steps. So I got into the steps with my sponsor full bore. And we got into this emotional stuff of like, what's happening with you on a daily basis? Like, how does your wife make you feel? How do your kids make you feel? How do you make you feel? What are the stories you're telling yourself? Like, what are your real fears? And I got into the work, and it wasn't just the 4-step of like, oh, I stole this and it hurt this and my part is this. And it was things that I thought I had no part in. I got to dive into and find out that I have a part in every single thing that happens in my life. My abuse as a kid, which I never dealt with, I realized, like, no, at 7 years old, you don't have any, I don't have a part. It's not like, well, you were there. Like, well, it's my house. I'm 7. Of course I'm there. I'm trying to eat like mac and cheese. But what I do have a part in is that I use that incident to go out and spit poison at the world for the rest of my life. And what I do have is, as an adult, I never went to therapy. I never told anyone. I never shared about it. I never did anything other than the world is to blame. And that's as far as I got. And the book says it's as far as most of us got. So I got to dive into that and go, okay, cool. I have a responsibility now. The coolest part in the world for me is that if you guys are the problem, I'm screwed, because none of you are going to do what I want. You're just not. But if I'm the problem and I can do the work, then I can handle that. And it's like, okay, cool. How free do I want to be? How well do I want to be? Do I want to do some work? Because the work is going to make me feel better. And again, despite my circumstances, I can do some work. And despite anything that happens to me, that brother of mine, Christine, my wife, who stayed with me, God bless her. And I think it was a worthwhile investment, because I'm a pretty damn good guy now. It's taken me 852 years with 689 white chips, but I'm the best version of myself I've ever been. And that's completely because I lean on God all day long. And it's completely because I call guys and say, I'm scared. It's completely because I call Rick before this meeting and say, I'm scared to speak at this meeting. it's completely because I say, like, I don't feel good. Like, I'm afraid. I don't feel like I'm worthy. I don't feel this. Instead of being a cocky, arrogant, manipulative jerk, I get to be an honest, vulnerable, real man, which is all I ever wanted to be, and my brother needed to get sober. And so he came out to LA, and Christina, we put him in rehab. He went the same rehab I did. He got a sponsor, same 164 pages, didn't want to do the work. Went back home to my parents' house. And right after we had the twins, he went into this neighborhood in New Jersey to buy a bag like he always did. And two guys hit him in the head with a lead pipe and left him in the middle of the street with half a head to die. And that's how he died. Like, that's it. At 45, he's done. No more newcomer, no more chips, no more step tries, no more sponsors I need to change, no more, I'll go to a meeting tomorrow, no more, done. And these two guys that killed him, they caught him. And there's like video footage and stuff. And I talked to my sponsors, like, I don't know how to handle this, because what I really want to do is get some revenge and like all the stuff I see in the movies, because I was just hurting. And he said to me, you need to pray for them. And so I said, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I'm praying for my mom and dad right now, dude. And he said, I get it. You pray for them too. He said, but these guys need the prayers more than your mom and dad. And you pray for them that they get everything you want out of life, and that you pray for them to get sober, and you pray that you can forgive them. And so I did it. First week, I couldn't say their names. And by the second week, I was able to say, Jay and Al pretty easily. And then a few weeks into it, I really, really meant that I forgave them. Because here's the thing, it had nothing to do with me. It didn't happen to me. I make everything about me. My whole life is about me. The way my friends act, business doesn't happen well. We win the game, we lose the game. They're both because of me. My wife is in a bad mood because of me. You have depression because of me. Everything's because of me. And this, like, it's not true. It's not because of me. It's not a very emotional, sober way to live. But I never knew that before. It had never been really pointed out in a way that I could understand. And these men over time have pointed it out to me on a daily basis. And at that point, I was able to go, okay, cool. It didn't happen to me. Like, I just miss him. That's it. I'm just sad. I just miss him. And I wish that he would have got sober, because without a doubt, had he done the steps, he wouldn't have died that way. Right. But he didn't. So I prayed for these guys, and like, to this day, I don't have any, like, I don't want them to get out of jail, because I don't want them to hurt anyone else, but I hope they get sober in there and help somebody. I ask God to help them all the time, even now. That level of forgiveness is something that I'll never learn in church. I'll never absorb it in church. I won't absorb it from my mom and dad. My wife can't tell me, my kids can't tell me, but I can get it in Alcoholics Anonymous. I pay $0 for my sponsor. I pay $0 for the 100 phone calls a week I make to Rick. Like, it's just incredible. Like, why are you people so nice? Why is everybody so want to help? It's like the coolest thing ever. I don't want to drink. Like, I don't want to drink. I didn't want to drink when my brother got murdered. I didn't love anybody like that my whole life. How? And it's like, that's a principle I can continue to live by. My kids know that story. My kids get to see dad lean on God. My kids get to see mom and dad pray every day next to each other. Like, my wife and I pray together to a God of our own understanding. And it's not the God that I grew up with. That's incredible. My kids walk in the room. Sometimes they'll join us. Sometimes we have a dog that actually joins. It's the craziest thing. Rocco comes and lays down, puts his head right in there. It's crazy. My house is full of spiritual love. And by the way, we've been through it. We've been through the ringer. Alcoholism is powerful. And forgiveness is powerful. And, we get to treat the newcomer with love and tolerance. We get to treat everyone with love and tolerance, but we get to treat the newcomer with an exceptional amount of love and tolerance, even if they hurt us. We get to treat the newcomer like a newcomer, despite what my ego says, despite how my heart feels. Like, my sponsor pointed out to me, like, you need to treat a newcomer like a newcomer. Well, they did this to me. Well, I don't care. Doesn't matter if it's, the book doesn't say you get to treat a newcomer differently if they hurt you. Newcomers hurt everybody. That's what newcomers do. Like, when I got in here, I had come off hurting people. Nobody shows up here on a winning streak. That's just not my experience. My family, my home is full of love today. I think the coolest thing today is that I know that my individual recovery is what makes me a good husband. I know that my individual recovery makes me a good dad. I know last night when my 16-year-old got benched in the middle of the game for not hustling, and then we had a conversation on the way home. He was playing great too. And he's a valuable asset to his team, but he didn't hustle on this steal. Coach put him around the bench. And I said to him, what'd you do? He said, it was 1st and 3rd. I didn't have to hustle. The catcher never throws it. And I said, but he did throw it. You almost got thrown out. And he's like, well, I didn't know he was going to throw it. And I said, well, then why don't you run full speed all the time? And he said, well, because I usually know when he's going to throw it. And I said, but today you didn't. What are you talking about? You almost got thrown out. And he said, I got in there, and he said, why didn't you run? And he said, well, it was this signal and this. And coach said, no, it wasn't. And he said, yes, it was. And coach said, sit on the bench. And I thought to myself, it's the perfect example. Like, I spent my whole life trying to be right, and I'd sit on the bench. So I'm uncomfortable and I'm right, and I'm on the bench. All he had to do was say, you know what, coach, I'm sorry, my bad. And he'd have been comfortable. Maybe he's not right, but he's playing. He's going to get what he wants, which is to play baseball, and he's going to help his team. And when I act like that, when I'm an arrogant prick, which I am a lot because I have a character that is slowly going away, and it's transforming. And when I act like that, like I get on the bench, and my wife doesn't have a husband, and my kids don't have a dad because I'm on the bench, but I'm right. You know what I mean? I'm over there, I'm uncomfortable, and I'm right, but I'm on the bench. And they're like, we could care less. We need you off the bench, and we need you as dad. Like, what are you doing? Because my ego is so powerful, you know what I mean? Because it gives me power. I never had power. I had power with alcohol. You took away alcohol, and then I had to find God. And unfortunately for me, I'm not with God all day. I got to just keep bounce all day long. I'm like, oh yeah. And I start, like, right now, I talk to God maybe 20 times a day. It's not a morning thing and an evening thing. I'm like, what do I do here? Or it's heating up with my wife and I, a conversation. I go, please help me not act inappropriately here. And how cool is that? Like, I would hear people share on the meetings. I was like, it's easy for you, dude. You got 37 years and 18 grandkids. Who cares? Like, I'm talking about real life. And it's like, I'm in real life participating in my recovery. The big book in the doctor's opinion says, it's talking about how we go on sprees and we ruin a bunch of stuff and there's no way out. And it says it's repeated over and over until this person can experience an entire psychic change, right? Until then, it's very little hope of his recovery. On the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who don't understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol, the only effort necessary being required to follow a few simple rules. That's amazing to me. And the few simple rules are the steps. And in the spiritual experience, it says, spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which upon careful reading, when I got here, I thought of spiritual experience. I was like, oh God, like I got to go to some like retreat and do the thing and sit on the mountain. My legs don't cross because my knees hurt. What are we doing? Come on, I just want to stop drinking. But it says the spiritual experience shows that the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself. Like, my personality when I got here sucked because there was a guy walking around up here with a bunch of intentions that were noble and heartfelt and warm and loving. And sometimes they'd be down here. But then there was the guy who was actually walking on earth who was acting in a completely different way. No consistency, completely incongruent. Today, this guy who has good intentions and this guy often meet. That's amazing to me. If they can continue to meet more than not, I'm thrilled. And what's in between them is God. All I got to do is reach for God, and he just brings me down to the guy on earth, and he brings the intentions and all the good stuff into that guy. And then the actions I take are proper. I always knew right from wrong. I just didn't want to get in trouble, and I didn't want to lose what I wanted. That's it. That's it. And I wanted you to like me. And today I don't have to worry about that as much. I'll end with this. Talking to my buddy Rick yesterday or day before, and I shared this on my group. And, I said to him, yeah, it was a great day. I did this. I hit the meeting. I'm the coach at the ba, 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 da. I did some writing, blah, blah, blah. And right after I said it, I thought to myself, I didn't do any writing. I didn't do any writing at all. I haven't done any writing in a few days. And then I thought to myself, well, I'm only saying that because I want to, I'm covering Rick because we have a commitment to write and I don't want his feelings to be hurt. And like, even my second instinct's wrong. The first one's a lie. The second one's a justification. And the third one is, I don't want Rick to think I'm a loser because I didn't do what I said I was going to do. And all I have to do is call Rick and tell him. And I called him and he's laughing. He's like, yeah, listen, I get it. It's great. But how great is it that the time between when I say something and the time where I need to change it is really small now. And then the time I actually take to call someone and say, hey, I was lying, or hey, here's this back I took, or whatever, it's all shrinking. It's all shrinking. It's headed in such a positive direction. And it's all because of God and people in Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous introduced me to God. The steps introduced me to God and a different character. I was able to go out into the world because I lean on God and this new character and try it out. Everybody responded really well. And then all of a sudden I'm of value to help other people do the same thing. It's pretty bitchin'. There's no job I'll ever do. There's no kid I'll ever raise. There's no home run that he's going to hit tonight that's going to compare to that. It's just not. And I want a lot of things, but like, if I can be a good dad, a good husband, and most importantly, help other people in the world and not be such an a-hole, I feel like I didn't expect to live past 25, 30 years old. I just didn't. And here I am. And I'm a resilient guy, and I'm not going to ever give up. And right now I know for sure that if I continue to do this work, I'll stay sober and happy. So Stephen, thanks so much for asking me to share, buddy.